Hey class, so now that you've listened to a brief overview of what thieves is, where we're going to steal clues from a nonfiction text to better understand what it's all about, I wanted to model what that looks like when you are reading a passage or a book or any nonfiction text and making those notes and thinking about thieves as you read it. And so I picked a ReadWorks article on Martin Luther King since yesterday was Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And so I'm going to read over this one time, just reading through it, and then we're going to start to use thieves to dive deeper into the text. This passage is called Honoring King. Let me close that real quick. Americans pay tribute to a leader's legacy. For many Americans, Martin Luther King Jr. Day isn't just a day off from school or work. They will make it a day on and participate in community service projects in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Here's an image. It says the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King addresses a group of followers. A great leader. King, 1929 to 1968, was a famous civil rights leader. When King was growing up, the South was segregated or separated by race. Black people did not have the same rights as white people. Under the law, they were not allowed to attend the same schools as white people and had to sit in the back seats of buses. Black people also had to use separate restrooms and drinking fountains. When King was older, he worked to change those unjust laws. During the 1950s and 1960s, he gave speeches and organized peaceful marches and protests. Beginning in 1955, King led the famous Montgomery bus boycott. For 381 days, African Americans boycotted or refused to use public buses in the Alabama city. A year later, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation on buses was illegal. King gained national attention from the boycott and in 1963 delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. He told a crowd of more than 200,000 people in Washington, D.C. that his dream was for all people to be treated fairly and equally under the law. As a result of his work, civil rights laws were passed. Those laws protect the rights of all Americans. A day of service. Many people celebrate King's legacy on Martin Luther King Jr. Day with parades and other events. The legacy of a leader is something he or she has accomplished that would benefit future generations. For King, that meant making the world a better place. Thousands more honor King by cleaning parks, volunteering at homeless shelters, and participating in other community service projects. Everybody can be great because everybody can serve, King once said. By taking part in community service projects, Americans are able to keep this leader's dream alive. A civil rights hero, Martin Luther King Jr., January 15th to 1929, born in Atlanta, Georgia. August 28, 1963, delivers his "I Have a Dream" speech in Washington, D.C. December 10, 1964, becomes the youngest person to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. April 4, 1968, is assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. January 20th, 1986, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, first observed as a national holiday. So when we are doing this, we are going to, the best way is to just go ahead and write thieves at the top. And I'm going to talk to you a couple of things because this is an assignment given to you in ReadWorks. And so it's not like Cami where you can write it down. However, we can also start sharing a PDF version of this. And so if you download it, then you can open it in Cami and then you can do the same thing. And I could even use a text box up here. See, run that thing. They said. Move this down a little bit while I write that. Let's try that one more time. T.H.I.E.V.E.S. So now we have these on there. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is circle the title. And so I'm going to get my drawing tool, and then I can circle my title, and then I can label it with a text box. See, that's my title. And so my title says Honoring King. And so you want to think about honoring. What does that mean? You might wonder what honor means. And there's another tool on here that I found really helpful is, well, first off, you can right click and you can search Google for honoring. And then this will pull you up with the definition here. It says regard with great respect. Another option that you can do is with this read write tool, the one that says RW. You can click on it and it will pull up a picture dictionary. That's one that I not the best picture for this one, but you can kind of see like how they would hold themselves if they were honoring. And then there's also just looking up the definition. Oh, I didn't highlight. Let's try again. Honor, the respect that you wish to show for someone. So honoring, showing respect to Martin Luther King Jr. And then the next one we have, after you get that, you can even mark off on your thieves that you went over it. So H is for heading. And so I'm going to underline the headings. I'm going to choose a different color. Americans pay tribute to a leader's legacy. Okay, so you're going to think, what is this about? That's going to tell us just about that little section in the beginning, paying tribute. So if you might wonder what paying tribute might mean, you could highlight it. You can look it up in the dictionary. So something given or done as an expression of esteem. And that's probably the best one for this one. So it's a showing respect in the same sense, showing respect to a leader and their legacy. And let's see what kind of definitions we find for legacy. A gift of personal property by will. So for this one, I had to actually look it up in the dictionary. So legacy definition in history for a better definition. And so it says, in historical terms, a legacy is something that is handed down from one period of time to another period of time. So if you find something when you're looking up definitions, you're going to have words that have more than one definition, and you're going to have to, if you don't find one, it doesn't make sense at first, then you might want to look for other definitions for that word. And so in this sense, it's saying Americans pay tribute. They recognize a leader's legacy. So the things that he's done that have been continued to be honored and recognized today. We got another heading. It's called a great leader. So let's underline this one. And this passage was mostly about what he had done, right? So all the different things that made him a leader in the civil rights movement. This next one said a day of service. So this talks about what people do on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And this last one says a civil rights hero, Martin Luther King Jr. And this provided us just some facts and dates about his accomplishments in his life. So we got that one done. So that's the H heading. The next one is introduction, which we have a very brief introduction on this article. Others, you might have more of an introduction before they get into each section of whatever that topic is about. So it said, for many Americans, Martin Luther King Jr. Day isn't just a day off from school or work. They will make it a day on and participate in community service projects in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So this kind of talks about what people do to honor King. So that ties back into our title and what this article is mostly about. I'm just going to use a different color and underline a couple things. Actually, I want to highlight a couple things that I thought were important. So let's see, what box highlighter? Community service projects in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Let's see, text highlighter. There we go. After we do the introduction, we can mark that one off as well. Then you're going to look at every first sentence, and this is just for each section. So what I would do is I would highlight every first sentence in each section and just kind of think about how that tells me about what that section is about. So this says King, 1929 to 1968, was a famous civil rights leader. That tells me a pretty basic introduction about what this section is mostly about. The next one, a day of service. This says many people celebrate King's legacy on Martin Luther King Jr. Day with parades and other events. So that tells us in a topic sentence what a day of service is about, what people do to recognize Martin Luther King Jr. And then this next one's not really so much because it has the facts and figures, so I'm not going to highlight that, the first sentence there. There's not really even a first sentence. The V, we can mark off the E. The V stands for visuals and vocabulary. So here's where we look at pictures and vocabulary words. So we have a picture here, and if you want to think, what is this called text feature wise? Because it's not a drawing, it's an actual picture. If you thought photograph, you are correct. So this is a photograph. Underneath this, we have words that describe the photograph, and that is called a caption. That's what I would caption. And then we just want to look at this and kind of see how does this tie to the article. So it shows it's from the Library of Congress. It says the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King addresses a group of followers. So this could be his speech, his I Have a Dream speech, or it could be another speech. But either way, this is what he was doing. He was speaking to an audience, talking about civil rights and how every American should be treated equal. Let's scroll down. There were some vocab words on here, and I don't see that they were staying bold. And so I'm just going to flash back over here so you can see which ones they had kept bold on here. And so if you're reading on ReadWorks, you can actually click on these vocab words, and it will tell you the definition. So I'm going to read this passage, this paragraph to you real quick, and then show you how clicking on those words can help you. When King was older, he worked to change those unjust laws. During the 1950s and 1960s, he gave speeches and organized peaceful marches and protests. Beginning in 1955, King led the famous Montgomery bus boycott. For 381 days, African Americans boycotted or refused to use public buses in the Alabama city. A year later, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation on buses was illegal. And so if you want to click on protests, you'll see that protests are when you make a protest, you say that you think something is wrong, or you do something to show that you would disagree with something. So they are disagreeing with how they segregate on buses. And then a boycott is where you refuse to buy, use, or go in someplace, and you quit doing that so that it would bring about a change. And so they quit riding the buses in hopes of them changing the law about segregation on buses. And then it says for 381 days, African Americans boycotted or refused to use. Right here, this is a context clue. It's showing you a synonym for what the word boycotted means, or you could say definition. So synonym or definition kind of ties together. Boycotted or refused to use, that's how you can figure out some of these words. They leave you these clues in the text to help you understand what the meaning is. And then segregation is the practice of keeping people apart, especially people of different races. Segregation often means that people of one group are not allowed to go to the same schools or live in the same areas as people of another group. So they had whites in the front and Black people in the back. And so Martin Luther King held a protest to, they marched and they protested saying that they don't believe that that is right. And then they boycotted the buses, which means they refused to get on any of the buses. And then the US Supreme Court ruled that that was illegal. So they brought about a change. Okay, so those are the vocabulary. We talked about the visuals. We looked at the picture. Let me go back to the article right here. Okay, and so after you've gone over that, that's visuals and vocabulary. And then the last one is end of chapter questions. And so in ReadWorks, they do have questions, and often we assign these for you to answer. What did Martin Luther King Jr. do to change the unjust laws of segregation? So these questions, the reason you're being asked these questions is because whoever put this together thought that that was important. This important information for you to know. So knowing what did he do? What actions did he do to change these unjust laws? We just read a paragraph about that, and we also know that he had given speeches. What dream did Martin Luther King Jr. describe during his famous I Have a Dream speech? So what did he talk about? What did he want for everybody? That's also another big important reason why we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day, is because of what he believed in was important, and it changed the way that the laws are. It changed. He was a big advocate for civil rights. So he made all these changes because he spoke with everyone else and protested against how the unfair treatment. Sorry, my brain just stopped for a second. What conclusion can one come to about Martin Luther King Jr. based on this passage? So what can you say about Martin Luther King based on the passage? This is a little bit more in depth, but let's take a look at this one. So he said, or A is, he thought equality under the law would be a very hard to achieve in the South. So he thought it'd be hard to achieve. Not sure about that one. B, he inspired people to be violent if they needed to draw attention to problems of segregation. Not sure I read that either. C, he used peaceful means to achieve widespread change for Americans. That sounds pretty good. D, he felt marches, protests, and boycotts were not effective ways to bring about change. If he thought he was not effective, they might not have done it. So you can see that he used peaceful means to achieve widespread change for Americans. That is your best answer choice there. And then there's some on the vocabulary terms. What is the passage mainly about? Describe what life was like in the South when Martin Luther King Jr. was growing up. And then there's these open-ended answers as well. So the questions, that just gives you an idea of what is important from an article. Whatever you're reading, if it might be a nonfiction books, a lot of times they have chapters, questions at the end. It's just telling you what the person who put it together, what they found was important. And then the last thing on thieves is summarize. And so Sometimes you'll have something at the end that summarizes all of the information. We don't really have that in this article, but you can just kind of think of what could you say to summarize this? What is this mostly about? So we know it's about Martin Luther King Jr. It's about the celebration of his day and how some people don't just treat it as a day off. They actually do things to honor King and give back. They talk about how they have parades in his honor and events. They, right here, it says thousands more honor King by cleaning parks, volunteering at homeless shelters, and participating in other community service projects. So Thieves, as you can see, it takes a little bit of time, but it helps you understand a passage so much more. This is a great technique to use on a star passage that might be an informational text where you can tell it's not just like a made up story. But you'll just take it section by section, you'll break it down, look at each piece, and by the end, you'll have a pretty good idea of what that article or text is about. So I hope this helps. We're going to be assigning a few Storyworks articles in the next few weeks. And so I want to see you using these strategies, using Thieves. I want to see that you're marking up and annotating and making notes, labeling things, because that's just going to help you understand a text so much better. Let us know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for listening to the end. And we'll have more on this next lesson.